Welcome, everyone. This is Maria Spriggs, and I'm pleased to be your host for the 0 to 3 Summer Book Club. This is our last and final member exclusive book club for the summer, and it has been a delight engaging with you and all of our very authors over the past few months. If this is your first session, I want to take a minute to explain how it will work. First, I'll make some introductions. Then, after the hellos, we'll give you all a chance to make a comment and or ask the authors a question. Think of a passage, chapter, idea, or example from the book that you'd like to ask a question about or comment on. Or you can go on to Member Connect and see the post that we have from our authors themselves, and you can further elaborate on that post. You'll notice that your microphones are now muted at this time, but if you use the raise your hand feature on your control panel, we will unmute you so that you can ask your question directly to the authors. Or as an alternate, you can submit your questions in the questions pane and we'll read it out loud for the author to respond. Lastly, we'll close out with a few words from our author. Now let's get started. First, I would like to present to you all the Director of our Member Services, Ms. Julia Richards.
Well, hello again and welcome back for this, sniff, sniff, end of summer, our last big hurrah on the 0 to 3 Summer Book Club. We are very, very excited about today's featured authors. And before I have the pleasure of introducing them, let me just thank you again for being a part of this special new series. It has been so exciting, and we've learned so much about working with you all in this way. If you joined us before, you know that our real true hope with the Summer Book Club is not only that we would give folks a chance to get exposed to some resources that are here and available to you in the field, that we would personally get to connect with you as part of our member services team, but also really that you would begin to make some really important connections with one another. And I think that's what we've been most excited about, are the conversations going on here, the conversations going on Connect. And we would really hope that you'll continue to find these opportunities helpful, but also really make it a point to, when you hear somebody raise something that's exciting and interesting to you, that you follow up with that person. These are all folks who are available to you through Member Connect, and they are all your colleagues and peers in 0 to 3 membership. So again, make use and connect. And with no further ado, it is my great pleasure to go on and introduce you to our distinguished featured authors of the hour, and also just on a personal note, cherished colleagues of mine now for many, many years, Mary Claire Heffron and Trudi Murch. Both of today's authors come from a background of clinical, direct service, and leadership in the early childhood field, and among many, 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 many things together, including probably no less than 100 presentations at the annual conference, formerly the National Training Institute, together. They have worked on such products such as a set of video vignettes with a training manual entitled Finding the Words, Finding the Ways, Exploring Reflective Supervision and Facilitation. And today we'll be discussing another key work that they've collaborated on, their insightful publication with 0 to 3 called Reflective Supervision and Leadership in Infant and Early Childhood Programs, which just happens to be also a bestseller at 0 to 3 and has been for many years. This work really hones in on reflective supervision, program development, and leadership in early childhood programs. With that, I am very thrilled to turn it over to Trudi and Mary Claire. And I did want to ask, in addition to saying hi and really introducing yourselves in any other way you'd like to, I did want to ask if you'd start us off by talking a little bit about sort of the origins of reflective supervision and leadership, and sort of what led you, maybe not even just into this book, but into interest and really a career focus on reflective supervision and leadership. So thank you and welcome, and I turn it over to you.
Okay. Trudi, are you going to jump in, or do you want me to?
You start and then I'll.
Okay. Okay. I think I'll start with the broad question of what led me to this interest, and which kind of goes back to the fact that very earlier in the history of infant and early childhood mental health, and I think we have to appreciate this is a relatively new field. And when I was entering into it, it was a really new field. And there were many luminary people who were sort of shaping and directing and helping form new staff people to do this. And I was among that group of people who were being trained. And because I had been trained by leaders in the field, Julie Paul and Alicia Lieberman, Judy Pekarsky, and others, very shortly then people thought because you had been trained by them that you should yourself take on some sort of a role of helping new folks as they came into the role. So I like to think of it as I was asked to do supervision probably before I was really ready to do this, in terms of my own clinical skills. But because I like to jump off cliffs and things like that, I said, okay, I'll do it, and then proceeded to find out as much as I can, to read everything I could, to ally with colleagues like Trudi and others who were doing the same thing. So I became a bit of both a doer and in this field and a learner. And then also during this process, went back several times to get consultation from people who had been important to me in the field of reflective supervision in early childhood mental health. So I got, it was an early in, and then as I began to do more of this, a lot of people wanted to add reflective supervision services to their program, and so there was more work to do than time. And so this led to a conversation that Trudi and I had, which I'll sort of toss to you, Trudi, remember when we first started talking about this.
Sure, absolutely. I think, you know what, Mary Claire, as we're talking about it, I'm thinking the person we need to mention is Emily Fenichel.
Yes.
Who, many of you know and know of, and was a friend and an inspiration to both of us. And I think she's the one who originally had the idea and said to you, Mary Claire, why don't you write a book on it? And Emily was great about saying, why don't you write a book on this? Or why don't you do that? And just more cliff jumping. But then we started talking together. Mary Claire and I had worked together for a while on some training projects. Started doing it, I started talking about developing it. And I think for myself, I'm originally a speech language pathologist by training, and I work in a large private nonprofit agency in Phoenix. We do lots of different kinds of 0 to 5 services. And we had participated in some early 0 to 3 trainer of trainer activities to help agencies introduce reflective supervision into their agency. And in our agency, we were going through a period of tremendous growth, and we needed organizational principles that would be consistent with our philosophy of practice. And when we were introduced to reflective supervision, we saw it as a way that we could pull together administrative and business and HR practices with the actual work we did and be consistent. So we were really interested in it, and we started learning how to do it at a time when our agency was growing dramatically. So I had kind of lived through the process of learning about and implementing reflective supervision across lots of different kinds of programs. And I'm not a mental health person by training, and really got interested in what does it take to have this be meaningful and understood and effective with a wide range of programs, home visiting programs like Healthy Families, Head Start. I'm responsible for our disability services, so early intervention Part C. We do have a large mental health department, so of course for them, training department, we work in childcare a lot. So I've really been interested in how does this play out in all these different settings with people who come with very different discipline specific orientations. And so I think when Mary Claire and I got together, we had some similar experiences and some different ones. And it was really, really fun to try and map out together kind of an orderly approach. And I think we really spent a lot of time thinking about the structure, that people hear a lot about reflective supervision, but it sounds kind of like well, I will say this, I don't know, Mary Claire probably doesn't agree, but I think it gets to sound like a cult sometimes, like you're really special, you're a reflective supervisor, and what the heck does that mean if you haven't been exposed to it? So I think trying to think of something systematic that would be appropriate and helpful to a really wide range of people in the early childhood field and organizations, whether it's a small agency or a big state agency or whatever the constraints are or the resources are of your particular agency. So we wanted something that was systematic, organized, orderly, and that had a lot of practice, a lot of vignettes. We spent a lot of time thinking about the vignettes to just give people a flavor of the way this might play out in different situations. So we had some wonderful times doing it. We sat together up on our house on an island in northern Washington state and had wonderful conversations watching the sun come up and go down and figuring it out. So I guess that's about what all I would like to say about it for the moment. We're probably ready to have people jump in yet.
I would just add one more thing is that this book was so much shaped by, and you hear this from Trudi, but by experience and about questions that were raised in training and also just in supervision. And so what we wanted to do was make something that was alive with what the experience was, but had a recognizable shape that you could take to a funder and say, this is reflective supervision. We want to do this and we want to do this and why, and this is what it will look like. So that was a big, it was a huge task, but as Trudi said, a lot of fun and a lot of creativity went into thinking this through.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Mary Claire and Trudi, for sharing your motivation and experiences behind this work. But now let's go around and give the audience a chance to ask questions and become more engaged with this conversation. Everyone in the audience, please think of your question or comment, and when you're ready, remember you can use the raise your hand feature in your GoToWebinar control panel to raise your hand, and we'll unmute you so that you can ask your question. You can also submit your questions through text in the questions pane if you prefer, and we'll read them aloud for you. So let's go ahead and get started. And I wouldn't mind kicking off part of the conversation, but just by talking about mentorship and supervisors as mentors. How do you get supervisors to kind of shift their gears and shift their brains to think of themselves more as mentors in their roles?
Can I take a first stab at that, very clear? I think part of it, one of the things we wanted to do in our book and in the training that we've both done with different groups around the country, I honestly think the first important step is articulating as such, like clearly defining it. And one of the things that we did early on is try to define, not in a limited way, but just to sketch out key roles of the supervisor and to specifically state the supervisor has these various roles. First and foremost is promoting professional growth and development. And then other roles are, of course, quality assurance, providing support, emotional support, resource support, promoting communication between everybody, and being a leader in a leadership role within a team or an organization. So I think being very clear and explicit that the mentoring, professional growth and development is an important job of a supervisor, and then spending time talking about what does it take to do that. And then the other thing is that we spent a lot of time in our book, and in any time we talk about it, of just emphasizing that reflexive supervision is a blended model, that it blends your clinical and your administrative responsibilities. So it's a way of bringing those together. So that kind of highlights the mentoring as well.
I would just add one thing is that, so I think this is such a great question, Maria, is when people begin to do supervision, it's a sort of a really critical time that they have a more experienced person to meet with, to get consultation and mentorship and supervision from. So beginning to do supervision yourself most of you are probably already doing this, and you may remember, you may not, but for many people, it is a moment of, it's a kind of a frightening thing, because all of a sudden you are holding, not only you're holding the clinical work, the work that's happening, you have a responsibility for that, and you have a responsibility for this professional development. So the question always becomes, in agencies and in communities, where do people go who are doing reflective supervision themselves, particularly as they begin, and how do they get support and help? And people find, creative ways to do this, but it's certainly, I think, in terms of mentorship, it's go back to something that Jerry Paul, who was one of my mentors, told me, is that this work is too important to do alone. And when she said that, she was talking about clinical work. And as I say it, I'm talking about supervision. Is, as supervisors, we need support, thoughts, encouragement, recognition from someone who is a colleague or a mentor in some way, so we can continue to grow in this work. I'll stop there. Yeah, it looks like we have a question.
Yes, we have a few questions from the audience. Thank you so much for that initiating question. We have a hand raised by Miss Barbara Becker. Barbara, if you can prepare to we're going to take you off mute, and if you'd like to ask your question, you can do so now.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Hi. As part of the Training and Technical Assistance Network for Head Start, we support grantees and do some initial training about reflective supervision. My question is it possible to implement on an individual basis if the grantee or the whole agency has not really adapted reflective supervision as their overall approach?
Mm-hmm.
That was it.
Okay. This is a Trudi question.
Well, well, we get that a lot, and a sort of a corollary question to that is, can you do it if the person at the top leadership doesn't really buy into it or understand it? Would that be accurate to say that's sort of another permutation of that?
Yes.
But basically, I think we would both say that yes, absolutely. It's more difficult, but I think that if you're a program manager or a leader within an organization that doesn't do it across the board, then you can find colleagues through other networks and so on to be a support and to be a mentor for. But they're basic practices of being reflective and doing exploration and helping people to learn to slow down, step back, pay attention to their own responses, explore, feel safer in talking about things that are hard for them, that I think can be done one-on-one, even if it doesn't happen anywhere else or within one team and not with the whole agency. It's harder for sure, but I don't think anybody should give up on it because the whole organization is not there. I don't know, Mary Claire, what do you think?
Well, I would agree with that. And the reason I would say that is that it's important that we remember that reflective supervision and the process of doing reflective supervision is linked to program outcomes and quality. So we know that individual teachers, therapists, social workers, people doing our 0 to 3 work are going to do better work if they have the opportunity to build their own reflective capacities in supervision. We know that. They're also less likely to leave. There's all sorts of reasons. So I think that if you are a supervisor in an organization where, let's say, the top layers of organizational leadership don't buy into that as an organizational or a style, and you are doing that in your program, your home visiting program, whatever it would be, what I also suggest is that those leaders, those supervisors, directors of those small programs develop an ability to articulate very clearly to their leadership, to their bosses, why they are doing this and why it's important and what it is doing. So, pulling from the research, from the outcomes, and being able to make statements of this is why we do this, and this is why I have included this in my budget. This is what we need to be able to do this well. That the staff need this kind of time, and I need this sort of time to support the supervisors. So I think being articulate within the organization, even if the whole organization hasn't bought into the notion of we are really working hard to have reflective processes at all levels. So it's so I guess what I want to say is that reflective supervision should not be a secret activity. If you do it, it should be seen as this is part of the philosophy of this team, this program, and this is why. It's not even just because it feels better or people like it, or it's really because it relates to better outcomes and better staff retention. So I think that is what I would add to that.
And I think the other thing to think about in addition to that is to figure out what does it actually mean. I think sometimes people have the idea that reflective supervision is with specific frequency. Right. They may not appreciate that peer supervision can be you can have individual supervision, but you can have small group and peer supervision too as a complementary activity. There are a lot of different ways to do it. So I think not having a kind of a monolithic idea of it's only one thing and only done one way with a certain frequency and a certain kind of a room, that I think there is a little flexibility in how it actually can be provided. So maybe people could explore that too. So it might not seem so daunting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question, Barbara, and thank you, Trudi and Mary Claire, for your very thought-provoking responses and insight on those. We have another question from the audience from Miss Mary Warren. It says, Trudi, you mentioned wanting to establish RS in multiple agencies and disciplines. Do you have some guidance for an administrative type about how to sustain the cost of providing it?
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's a Mary Claire question. No. Well, I mean, I'll just say briefly, but I think what Mary Claire just said about if you think about what are the challenges that some administrators face in terms of staff retention and being able to provide high quality services that meet all of our various regulatory standards and contract standards and standards of practice. I do think that people really appreciate if you have staff who stay longer and do better work, that is an obvious advantage to an organization from even a financial point of view and from an administrative load perspective. I think the other thing is that if you do have, for example, in our agency, the frequency of supervision varies quite a bit depending on the program and our contracts and our resources. For example, in Nurse Family Partnership, it's weekly. It's specified by the national program. It's great practice and it's built into our budgets. But in our Part C early intervention program, we only have resources for monthly individual supervision. And then we have looked for ways of, I think an efficiency strategy is to look for what are naturally occurring opportunities within your program, times when people get together. We have weekly team meetings in Part C, so we have carved out a block of time for every single meeting where we do talk about practice issues, a child, a family, a case that we're all struggling with. So how can you, rather than necessarily having a lot of separate supervision time, how can you build it in a regular and predictable and meaningful fashion into your ongoing practices or your ongoing routines? So I think those are some of the ways that we have done it.
I would just add, in the past few years, number of years, I've had a lot of experience in big organizations, public health and social services, where people are have asked me to come and think about, supervision with them. And one of the things that I always ask about is what are the particular challenges that they have around staff and supervision and employee issues. And as you begin to work with that often becomes a way to sort of link improvements in program outcomes and things that they're dealing with shifts in their supervision style. The other thing that Trudi said is incredibly important is to ask people what are the points now where people gather, for staff meetings, other things, and then to help them do an analysis of how they can shift the quality and the nature of at least some of that time. So there's opportunities for reflection.
And the other thing I would say to sort of add on to that is we don't think of reflective supervision as occurring in a vacuum, that we do. I think I would speak for both of us, Mary Claire, when we've gone in to try to work with different agencies or organizations, we've ended up thinking about how does the agency as a whole, or how does the program as a whole help their staff understand reflective practice and relationship-based work, because it's not just the activity of supervision where those principles and perspectives are important, but it's really across all of what we're doing. So the more you can build that into the way that we are with each other and the way we practice with families, then it gets less, it doesn't feel like something separate and different. It's more part of the work that we do.
Mm-hmm. But again, I'll go back, and Mary, your question is such a good one, is that, and this is something that I think is very important as we move forward, when programs are considering, improving or adding reflective supervision, it's so essential to have these kind of meaningful and provocative conversations with the leaders in the organization so they have a chance to think and understand in more depth the value of reflective practice, reflective capacity, and again, how it's related to the outcomes. And because this is representing often a shift and a deeper understanding of organizational management, how people think about employees, rather in a hierarchical way, but more in a way where there is an encouragement of the individual employees or providers' capacities to think and problem solve in the moment. And when people begin to think about that and talk about that, they get pretty excited because it does really build staff capacity, their investment in the work, and there's quite a bit of research to back up this point of view.
And the other thing is, if you help administrators understand the the prophylactic aspects of supervision, that it allows you to anticipate and be proactive in addressing issues with families or staff or teams or whatever. What I always say is nobody has time. You think nobody has time to meet for individual supervision, but when the family is suing, we will all be there on Tuesday morning at 9 for a meeting. So I think all the things that supervision does to help you anticipate problems and address them before they become really challenging. I think that's something that administrators understand as well.
I don't know if Mary, if we've answered your question, but you provoked a lot. So
Mary, she expressed much gratitude for your answers. Her comment was excellent answers. Thanks. Waiting for staff outcomes as a result of RS doesn't get the ball rolling. So I guess building it into a budget for professional development is a good way to begin. So she definitely appreciates your answers. Thank you, Trudi, and thank you, Mary Claire. We have another question from the audience. This question is from Marion Williams. It says, I have led reflective supervision training for mental health supervisors, and I'm now trying to put together a training and group for cross-sector professionals that would include, in one group, professionals from early intervention, early education, mental health, child welfare, and etc. Do you have any suggestions for ways to make this successful and get buy-in from leaders across all sectors?
Okay. Well, first of all, bravo for including everybody because everybody needs this. And I think Trudi will have some other things to add to this, I'm sure, but one thing I think of is that often reflective supervision is done, not always, but is done by people who come in who have been trained in mental health, because this is often where there is a lot of reflective supervision is a regular part of the process in most types of mental health service. So you're trainers, and you may be one of those trainers, or you may be working with other trainers. So if people are coming from a mental health background, it's really important to make sure that there aren't assumptions made about what the audience knows, in terms of how they've done their work. So for example, and I work, my original work training was in child development. I worked in Head Start for many years, and continue to do some of that work, and I love it. But oftentimes what I find with teachers is they have many regulations. They have many people observing, checking off if certain things are right, all the sorts of evaluative processes that may not be understood by somebody coming out of a different background. So it's important that whoever does the training does some investigation. Is what is a day in the life like of the people who are coming to this training? What is their work actually like? What are the things, the requirements that they have? What scares them? What's hard for them? What's easy for them? So that they're going in and sometimes spending more time on the foundational notions that might not be there because of the person's background, but also deeply listening to what is the reality and what would be the value of having some opportunities to sit down, think about, question, and worry about some of the things that are happening. And for many teachers, they're under a lot of, they might be under more pressure to fix things faster, as opposed to think things through and try things out. So we're really needing to understand what is someone's reality. I began to do work with people in the child welfare work, and I thought, well, this is, I'm used to working with high-risk kids. This is easy. And then found out when I listened deeply that, those people had caseloads of 40 to 45 families, and how could you even remember all their names? So this is, part of understanding the reality of what is someone's work, what will work, and what are the principles that are going to be, how do you teach those principles to someone experientially? As part of it is that you provide them with examples that are close to their work, demonstrating reflective practice principles, but close enough in story so that they recognize it and go, yeah, that would be good. I could do that. Or this is my life. This is my life. And here's a new way to think about my work life, and a slightly different approach.
And I would add a couple ideas to that, because Mary Claire and I have both done this to work with these, not only with different kinds of agencies and programs, but we've worked with mixed groups a fair amount, right, Mary Claire?
Mm-hmm.
So I think one thing I try to do, in addition to what Mary Claire was saying, is a couple of things. First of all is provide some activities, one or two reflective activities at the beginning of the session of the training, or whatever the event is, a professional learning event is, that would be kind of that everybody could relate to equally, whether you had the sort of language of relationships or not. or language of reflection or not. And those would be really simple things like asking people to think of a supervisor or a teacher or a therapist that they had who was particularly effective to them, was really helpful to them, and to just kind of jot down some notes describing that person, and then why were they particularly helpful to you? What about them was especially helpful? And they will inevitably, wherever discipline they come from, because it's just, you know, an experience many of us have had, hopefully we've had somebody helpful in our life, that they start describing the qualities of the relationship and of the interactions, and then you can highlight that and say, this is what really shines through, and here's why. Another activity that I often do right in the beginning, again reflective for a group of supervisors coming from various places, is to ask them either to think about a challenge that they have at the moment, or perhaps ask them about something, a strength they think they bring to supervision, and then also to think of something that just in their role as supervisor that's a challenge for them learning to do, or that they need to learn better. So if you facilitate a discussion, if people start sharing those things, then you as the facilitator can pull from them and highlight key principles of reflective supervision and say, you know, what you're talking about is the fact that as a supervisor, you have both the mentor and the monitor role, and how challenging it is to integrate that. And during our session today, we'll give you some ideas about how you integrate those roles. Or if somebody starts talking about, you know, they used to be, I mean, it's very common, somebody used to be a direct service person, they've been promoted to be a supervisor, and how challenging it is to now supervise the people that they once were colleagues with. And that gives you an opportunity to say, you know, this is where sort of really understanding about boundaries is so important, and that's something that we really want to talk about. But I think what tends to happen is people in this mixed group start to hear that they all, whether they come from mental health or don't, they all are struggling with kind of similar things. And it gives you an opportunity to lay out some key principles and key practices up front, which then you can go through in a more systematic didactic fashion a little bit later if you want to. And an unrelated suggestion I would have, but I feel really strongly about, Mary Claire's bored with this because I say it all the time, probably, but anyway. I think you have to be really careful when you're talking with people, working with people who don't come from mental health, to watch your language. Because I remember as a young speech pathologist, I had a professor who asked us to listen to something and write down how we felt about it, and then to write down what we thought about it. And I remember as a young person being just outraged, like, this is ridiculous, and what do you care? It's none of your business what my feelings are anyway. I think a lot of people feel it's quite intrusive to be asked, what do you feel? And so there are so many other ways in supervision we can do the same thing. We can say, you know, what's your take on that, or where does that leave you? And gradually, I think you can also help people. Some people learn in a more cognitive fashion, and you can say, you know, as we all know, feelings actually drive actions and drive the way we understand things. And so we really need to pay attention to how we're feeling if we're going to be able to do our best work, because our feelings are driving what we're doing. But anyway, I think just being conscious of our language, because mental health language can be quite off-putting to some people. Mm-hmm. And you can have the same discussion and just use other words.
Right. Thank you, Trudi. And I love hearing that. I would just also add one more thing, is that I really salute you for doing this training together, because I feel that by training together, we're also increasing people's capacity to have a common reflective language, which increases collaboration across systems, which is hugely important.
Yes, thank you both so much for your responses to those questions. It's very, very thought-provoking and challenging, you know, as we can see, just as you both have reflected it from your own experiences, just from observing also the challenges in reflective leadership. We have another question from the audience here in the question box. I just want to remind the audience you have the option to send questions in the question box, or to use the raise your hand feature in your GoToWebinar. So this question is from Shashi. She said, the the presenter says, I have been asking this question in multiple contexts lately. I am an EHS HSRC for an organization that is struggling with the cultural shift toward reflective practice. How do I continue to ease their regulatory needs and standards while they develop their warm nurturing of their teachers?
Mhm. Well, this is the question. This is a great question. Wow. I first of all, I love the question because it's the essence of how do we blend what Trudi calls the mentoring and the monitoring role. How do we provide a holding environment, and yet as supervisors have these huge responsibilities to make sure that these programs are, performing, doing, documenting, and meeting the regulations. And it's no easy task. I think one of the things that I would strongly encourage you to think about, and maybe we can think about it together a little bit here, is how important it is to frame in the beginning what it is that you're doing in supervision. What is it that we are doing together? Why are we meeting? And also to ask people what has been their previous experience of supervision. What has supervision been like? Because for some people, the process, depending on where they've worked and who's been their supervisor, supervisors have not always been supportive, helpful, benign people. They've been people that, that call you on the carpet, or that are not so interested in hearing the sort of some of the backstory on some of the reasons that things might be more difficult to implement, or things that you're working with. So I think this framing of what is it we're doing, and Trudi mentioned the roles, of being a teacher, a mentor to somebody, in providing a holding environment, and then this really important role of of helping somebody meet the regulatory requirements for the job. The job is the job. If you sign up to be a teacher in Head Start, this is part of the deal. And what does it mean to help somebody do that? What are the ways of helping? And what those ways might, what they might look like. But I think this beginning discussion is so important for setting the framework. And often there's a tendency for supervisors sometimes, because they want to be supportive and they want to be helpful and they want to be nice, to have a more difficult time finding ways to balance this. How do I bring up the fact that someone is behind in their their classroom plans, or what are the ways to bring this up, or how do we discuss this? And how do I hold the line and continue to focus on that in a way that isn't punitive, but is supportive, explorative, and effective? And I think these are things sometimes where supervisors require, what we have found together, and is that supervisors require many opportunities to practice how to do that. How do you do that? And then how do you, manage people's responses to you? And there's all sorts of things that can occur with this, because it's a complicated relationship. Trudi, I'll let you jump in. You look like you're ready to.
Yeah. Well, I have so many thoughts about this. The first thing is, I think as much as you can help, you can work with staff. We talk about supervision as being, the three pillars are regular, reflective, collaborative. And as much as this monitoring function can be a collaborative thing, to be a shared responsibility, that, we all work as part of Head Start, so we all are answering to these standards. And anything we can do to have staff feel like they own it, like how previewing, like monitoring that's coming up, previewing it, having them participate in planning for it, sharing with them to say, we've just had this new regulation come. It's an important thing. We need to do it. Can we think together about how shall we do it in our program? So they don't always experience things as top down. If there's file reviews to do, to have it be a regular part of ongoing conversation and supervision, that we're always bringing our files in and talking about them as we're talking about centers, that we set up opportunities for staff to sort of self-assess, to have some sort of checklist where they go through their stuff first and say, and we ask them, do you see something, a pattern yourself in your own documentation of something that you want to work on? Anything we can do to make it a shared responsibility and let them know it's coming. And another thing I think we have to do is let them know why it matters, because I think it's very tempting to kind of demonize. I mean, I've done this very often with our state Part C. We have a Part C early intervention program, and we have a state office, and I don't always think they do such a great job. So it's really easy for me to say all kinds of things about them, about, oh, they're making us do this and they're making us do that and blah, blah, blah. But if I can be realistic with my staff and say, this is, for example, we're shifting to more of a blended, in our Medicaid program in our state, it's becoming a blended care model of medical with the developmental services come under that, medical and behavioral health, and to say, this is a fabulous endeavor. It really matters. It's a great idea. How it's actually happening is kind of cumbersome. It's kind of messy. We're going to have to be tolerant of a certain amount of aggravation here, but it's to a good end. So if I can frame things for them so that it doesn't seem like it's just landing on them and it has no meaning, and if they can participate in planning for and carrying out some of these monitoring or contractual obligations, I think it really helps. And then the other, you use the language of we, not what you have to do, but we have to do, or we are doing, and let's figure out how we are going to manage this with all the other time constraints that we have. And the other bunch of ideas I would have would be related to what Mary Claire said, which is if we're doing supervision training or any kind of work like professional development for supervisors, I would really specifically focus on these skills of, difficult conversations. How do you spotlight something to say, I am concerned because, and, what that whole process can be, to get reflective about why you avoid it, the costs of avoiding it. Helping people learn I think some of the most basic supervisory skills have to do with contracting and clarifying. The more you can help people understand up front what the job is and what all of our expectations are, then it's way easier than having to kind of clean it up later on, just because you wanted to make it sound like nicer and easier in the beginning, but it gradually reveals itself to be more cumbersome than you had originally let people know. So those would be some ideas I would have.
We have too much to talk about, Maria, I'm afraid. I'm also thinking that one of the, there's sometimes misperceptions about reflective supervision and about reflective processes in general. And, reflective processes are both cognitive, like this invitation to think about, to stop and think about rather than to be told and do no matter what. That's a cognitive process. And then also, the emotional process of what it means to be with a child who's got a very complicated disability, or a family who's struggling because of, some sort of duress or trauma or separation. So reflective supervision is holding a lot. And so in the beginning, the importance of laying this out, and also the importance for the supervisor that she or he is remembering all these different pieces. I am helping someone with this kind of problem that may require this, and it is extremely easy because of the nature of the work to get very involved or spend all of the time that there is with some of these very weighty, either the provider's responses to the family child problems or the family child problems of how we work with them. And sometimes in an agency, depending on what those things are and what the regulatory pressures are and et cetera, the supervisors and the leaders, it's very helpful to think, are we balancing this? Are we providing enough time? Has the need to do these reviews or prepare for this sort of audit or that sort of audit, has it taken over and completely pushed out the staff's need to receive support for their hard work? Or, the other way around, are we so focused on this? And sometimes it means that you are thinking about the resources you have and shifting things around and maybe figuring out some more efficient ways to do certain things so that the totality of this supervisory task gets held.
Absolutely. Mary from our audience says, thank you. It's nice to hear reflection around any kind of difficult conversation and not just child family and child family oriented, because the advice that you're giving can be applied in nearly any setting that we find ourselves in. So thank you both so much. And even before that, Marion, the question you asked by Marion, they said, thank you. The answer was tremendously helpful. I want to go to a question from Ellen, and I think it's a good follow-up and a continuation from the answer that you all just provided for us. Are there any specific resources and articles that describe the positive outcomes, particularly related to staff retention? There are some challenges when program administrators have not experienced reflective practice and they need facts as to why to invest in it.
Yes, there are some studies and some outcomes, and some of these are, and I'm going to be I don't have these right at my fingertips to cite, but I'm happy as a follow-up in the next week or so to give you some of those things, some references, and maybe then people could, look at those and follow up according to their interests. But there are many, and one of the most important one of those, there's two that I want to cite. One is from the world of social services, where the staff retention issues are huge. And in some places, like the staff turnover in a year can be as high as 40 to 50%. Just think about that. So that is a really huge thing in terms of just, retraining new staff, recruiting. You could imagine as a director, you could be spending all your time doing that. So that those, some of those, there are several studies on that are big studies, including one in California that is showing how the addition of, support, reflective kind of support, is reducing some of that turnover. The other study that is really important is one that came out of Nurse Family Partnership, where they are showing the importance of staff retention. And one of the things that happens in Nurse Family Partnership is that there's a set of things that get done with the families that are enrolled and a lot of data collected. So mid-cycle, if a staff person leaves, the difficulties then of getting a family to engage with a new worker and do the assessments and the steps that sort of are related to those services, it just doesn't happen as well. It really affects the retention of families. So they're showing that staff retention then relates to families dropping out. With that same theme, going back to the same social service studies, they're finding that families that are involved in getting services to reunification services, that there's a much higher level of recidivism. In other words, kids going back into the system when there's staff turnover. So if you're a family getting family reunification services and on getting many struggles often with those families in terms of things that they're working with and trying to overcome, if they're counting on a social worker that they've come to trust, and that person disappears and there's a gap, or somebody else comes in, it's the same issue, is that then that leads to often those families, recidivism in those kids, those parents not following through with what they have to do, and often then more recidivism for, for those children going back into foster care. So there are some studies in those directions, which I'm happy to cite so that you can go read them and show them to your directors and wise people in your agencies to help with this.
That would be beautiful, Mary Claire, and I'm sure many are looking forward to it. We'll be sure to send that to you all who are present with us in the audience today to share those resources with you. And Ellen says many thanks, and she looks forward to receiving those resources. We had a comment earlier from Shashi, just on the reply you gave to her answer. She commented that it was very helpful, and she loves thinking about self-assessment first. Too often, my consultantees are receiving punitive measures, then then the teacher and I are working through their recovery of these harsh experiences. So she's grateful, just for your responses, and to take it and reflect on more. We have a question that was posted on our Member Connect. Mike, can you go ahead and share that?
Yes, hi everyone. This is Michael Paul, 0 to 3. I'm the community manager for Member Connect, our social platform. And Ellen, who had asked a question previously, posted a great question on Connect that I wanted to read aloud for you all to hear and for our authors to respond to. And her comment was, a topic that would be interesting, that she'd be interested in exploring, is providing a supportive and safe place for childcare providers who have not previously been invited to reflect on their work. As one person has said, I've never been asked about my ideas or thoughts, and so I don't really know what to say. So what words or actions might support building their capacity to reflect or share?
That's great.
Mary Claire, before you start, let me just say one thing, and then, which doesn't have to do with how you do it, but because I can see we're coming towards the end of the time here. And just one idea I wanted to just toss out, which relates to this question, is Mary Claire and I, in the beginning, we wrote this book. It was for supervisors and program managers. A lot of our professional development training is for supervisors and managers. But what we both have come to realize in the last few years is we need to pay the same amount of attention to supervisees, for staff, for people who are receiving reflective supervision, to understand what it's about, what the benefit is, what the opportunity is. So we've started in various ways doing a lot more explicit work with our staff on what this process is, how to participate, how to feel comfortable with it, why it matters. So I think that's a foundational response to that question. And then Mary Claire would have more specific thoughts, I'm sure.
Well, I would, and I would also refer you, and I don't know, Michael, if you can post this, but there was a recent article, I think in January of 2018, where we put down some of these ideas about orienting new staff to reflective practice and supervision in a short article in 0 to 3 that might be helpful, or many of you probably, if you're on Members Connect, you're members, so you can go back and read those journals that are piling up by your bedside, as I have them right now. But anyway, so I think that that's really, really, really important. I would also say that in addition to this orientation, and it's really important to have a place that has some privacy, that people, and that is, again, that there's a definition. We're doing this in a quiet place so we can think and, have privacy and be away from things. I've been in many childcare settings and situations where people are trying to do reflective practice or situation kind of in the middle of, too much activity, or in a corner that should be private but isn't. So as much as possible, and this sometimes takes some help from administrators to clear out a space. The other thing that I do often with that is for a long time, when I'm working with people, is to define the time. But my lead questions with people are often about, what is something that happened today between you and a child or you and a parent that really made you feel good? What was that? Can you tell me about that? And then as people do that, then I can begin to label some of the things that they were doing. Wow, you really did take enough time to listen to that dad when he was so annoyed and complaining about having to wait. I think that sounded like that really helped him. So we're labeling, we're encouraging, sort of doing a technique that I think we called highlighting the positive. Um, and, and then as people bring in things, or it's necessary to bring in things, to really do so, to bring in things that might not be, 100% wonderful, to bring it in this sort of tentative, collaborative way about, there were some questions, and I heard that there was some struggles today during the, transition from inside to the outside, and I didn't see it, but I'm wondering, what was your take on it? What did you see? How did, let's think a little bit about that. As I heard, I heard the sound from my office, or somebody told me things didn't go so well. So let's, I'd love to hear from you what you thought was going on today, because that's something that usually goes well, or I've not heard that before, whatever it is. So you're tiptoeing into an area, and then always asking people, always, are there things that are coming up for you that you want to talk about, during the day, or how things are going, or what are the things, is there anything that you feel is getting, that gets in the way of some of the things we are trying to accomplish in this center. So being very careful in the beginning, as you kind of build up a sense that you are somebody that's safe and is not going to jump on them with a lot of negative stuff to begin with, and that you are, really, you're wanting to engage them in conversation.
And I'd add a few other things to that too, just highlight what Mary Claire said about being tentative, go slow, it takes time. And your own body language, that even if what they're telling you is completely freaking you out, that you're sitting, that you honestly, you have your feet on the floor, you're calm, you're listening, you're monitoring your own reactivity is really important. The whole thing, even though it's obvious, but let's say it again about confidentiality. And because tremendous damage can be done if people feel like what they say is not, held in confidence. Even if you think it's positive, like in a staff meeting, if you say, oh, Mary brought up such an interesting case in supervision yesterday, and Mary, would you like to tell about it? Well, Mary didn't know you were going to mention it. You should say to her, this is such a great story. Would it be okay if in our team meeting, if I ask you to share it? Would that be okay with you? Mm-hmm. The other thing of course, clarifying, I think for people who don't have much experience, clarifying confidentiality, like if we're not promising never to tell, but we're saying, I promise you that if something comes up here that I feel I need to talk to my supervisor about, I'll let you know, and we can talk together about it or whatever. So just being clear about that. And then the last thing I would want to say, I think that helps with people feeling confident and secure, is if you have a clear routine, if there's a flow and a rhythm to your supervision sessions, you meet and connect, you say, how's your week gone? That it's a mutually shared agenda. Like, I've got my list, I'm sure you've got yours. Would you like to start? Anything that you want to, I say, I want to be sure to save 10 minutes at the end to talk about X. But there's a predictability to the flow of the session, because I think that helps people feel secure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, yeah, I can't believe that we didn't say out loud confidentiality. And again, that's, something I think that has to be framed in the beginning. People are reminded of it. And it also kind of relates to this idea of having a safe place and a routine. Great question.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I think we're going to have to let Maria wrap things up, but I just want to let folks know that we will post links to these reflective supervision resources on Member Connect. So just be sure to look there for a follow-up soon, and I will turn it back to Maria.
Okay.
Yes, we'd like to thank you both, Trudi Murch, Mary Claire Heffron. Thank you both for your time and for providing us all with an excellent discussion around reflective supervision and leadership. We also send a special thanks to all of you for joining us for our final installment of the 0 to 3 Summer Book Club series, and hope that you join us for future virtual events. As a reminder, all of our virtual events are always free for you as a member, and you also have ongoing access to all of our past virtual events and our member-exclusive resources. On behalf of 0 to 3, thank you all for joining us today. May everyone have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.